One of the final things we need to deal with in the world behind the text is how the creation account that we have, at least in Genesis 1 and a little bit in Genesis 2, those two different creation accounts, how they're similar to other ancient Near Eastern creation accounts. And you read about this in Banstra, so this is nothing new for you. But the world behind the text in Genesis 1 through 3, a lot of what we see here, a lot of the way that this is described is a lot like an ancient Babylonian creation epic. And remember that the Torah, the Genesis 1 through 3, is being formed in the midst of the Babylonian exile. And so the people of God are in Babylon as they're writing this down. And so it makes sense that the way that they describe who God is and how God creates would be similar to the stories that are circulating around them in Babylon. So Banstra took you through the Babylonian creation epic called Enuma Elish, and here is Enuma Elish. That's like a god or something. So Enuma Elish just means from the beginning. But Enuma Elish follows this certain order. So you can look through it here, but when you compare the Enuma Elish and the way that it runs through creation to the way that Genesis 1 is set up, you see that it follows a really similar progression, and that is likely intentional. It seems likely to me, number one, it could be that ancient peoples just thought about the creation of the earth in this way, and so we've got a Babylonian creation epic that goes in this order, and then our ancient Hebrew epic goes in the same order. That's definitely a possibility. Another possibility is that the authors of Genesis 1, when they sat down during the exile, made their story sound like the Enuma Elish so that they could show that this is similar to what you guys think. What we think is similar to what you think about how the world came about. However, we've got a couple of differences from you. So yeah, we're totally going to agree that darkness or primeval chaos existed first, and then that God creates light first, and after that there's sky, and after that there's land, and so on and so forth. We're going to follow you there, that's the progression of things. However, what we want to point out is that our God, this is a Hebrew speaking, right? This is somebody who's in exile, is different from your God. So why are these stories so similar? Maybe it was intentional, or maybe this is just how ancient thinkers thought. They were like, okay, it's pretty clear to me that God has to create the sky before God creates the land. I don't know. But one of the things that you can do is you can look at the Babylonian creation epic alongside Genesis 1, and you can see some pretty stark differences. I just showed you the similarities, but here are the differences. And it seems to me that what is going on here is that the people of God, when they sat down to talk about their God, they knew about the Babylonian gods. They knew about Marduk, and they knew about Tiamat, and they knew the stories that went along with these gods. And they said, we really need to introduce a God, our God, Yahweh, in a way that shows that Yahweh is in control of everything and cares deeply for Yahweh's creation. So those two things, Yahweh is in control of everything, and Yahweh cares for and loves Yahweh's creation. And so when you put these side by side, you're going to notice that over here in the Enuma Elish, the gods are kind of out of control and they're fighting with one another all the time. And over here in Genesis 1, we've got just one God rather than multiple, and this one God is orderly and sovereign, in control of everything, and seems to move things to the purpose of Yahweh's will. So Yahweh has power to put things right where they belong. And then really importantly is this right here. When Yahweh looks at creation, Yahweh consistently says, it is good. Now, that's not going to happen over here. The gods in the Enuma Elish get frustrated with creation really frequently, and this is an important contrast. Humans in the Genesis narrative are created in the image of God. they are endowed with God-like characteristics, and so that means that they are inherently valuable. And over here, humans are created to be slaves to the gods, and they're created out of the bad blood of a slain bad god. So this is a really stark difference. So it seems to me that what's going on in the context of the exile is that the people of God are sitting down to tell their story. And the way that they decide to tell it is similar to the way the Babylonians tell it, but different as well. And they hold out these two important things. Number one, our God is sovereign and doesn't fight with a bunch of other gods. And number two, our God actually likes creation. Our God says that creation is good. So those are the two differences that I see. So why do we have these differences, and what can it tell us about the genre? Well, you remember that I'm coming to you kind of like Steve, and I'm going to say, well, this tells us that these are not necessarily historical texts, but that they're here to communicate to us poetically something about who God is. And so what I'm going to say is that this text, Genesis chapter 1, is a theological text. It tells us something about God. That theological is the study of God rather than an historical text. It tells us something that's true about God, but it doesn't necessarily tell us the way that the world was created. All right, a couple more important things about this, the theological statements that are being made. Number one, we touched on this just before, that when God looks at creation, when the Hebrew God looks at creation, that God says, this is good, rather than this is bad. That should be meaningful for us today. Sometimes I think for many Christians it's not. But when Yahweh looks at creation, Yahweh says, this is good. I'm glad I did this, and I did a darn good job. That might mean that we need to take care of creation. Just something to think about. So next Earth Day, maybe go out and plant a tree, or maybe recycle, and maybe do all of those things that you should be doing to take care of the earth, because this is Yahweh's good creation. So that's the first thing. That's the first theological statement that comes across. And this second theological statement is also really important, and it fits in with the world behind the text. In the Bible, it says that God created humans in God's image. Now, the word for image there is this Hebrew word selim, and it's the same word for image or idol. Now, what the people who wrote this would have known is that they could go anywhere in Babylon, which is where they were in exile, and they could see multiple little idols anywhere they went. There were temples, and people had little idols or images in their houses. And here's one that's meant to represent Baal, and this is meant to represent another god. These are little images, little idols of gods. These are what the people in the ancient world thought of when they heard an image of God. They thought, oh yes, I know what an image of God is. It's an idol. However, in Genesis 1, we find out that God does not need idols on earth, because you are made in the image of God. Humans are made in the image of God. So God doesn't need these idols to represent God, because you are the representation of God on earth. And that should make a difference for us today. I'm kind of moving to the world in front of the text like I did when I told you guys to take care of creation. That should make a difference to us, that our God is not like other gods. Our God is pleased with creation, but also has endowed each human with the image of God. That means that it matters how we treat one another. That when we treat someone with disdain, we're treating the image of God with disdain. That when we treat someone with disrespect, we're treating the image of God with disrespect. When we say nasty stuff on social media to someone, we're saying nasty stuff to the image of God. And so this, in large part, elevates humanity beyond what the ancient world was willing to give to humanity, and puts humanity in a place where it is good and it is the image of God. Each one of these idols in the ancient world would have been treated with immense care because they are the image of God. So it also indicates to us that we also ought to treat one another with care. So that's what I have for you for the world behind the text. I hope that you have enjoyed it. This is just a little review of what we've talked about so far. So there are a couple of different things that are going on in these narratives, and they're meant to offer, at least in my mind, because remember, I'm like Steve, they're meant to offer a contrast to what you're seeing in the Babylonian world. They say something that's true about God, but isn't necessarily historical. All right, so that's what I have for you. Okay. So from there, we're going to have to move into a slightly different area, and I'll come to you with a different video for that.